Good evening. I'm Barbara Shapira, Chair of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh's Advisory Board, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the opening event for a year of programs to mark the 40th anniversary of the Holocaust Center, past, present, and future. In October of 1979, an auspicious group of leaders from Jewish Pittsburgh decided that our city needed to have a Holocaust memorial. Minutes from the meeting read, our Pittsburgh Holocaust Committee decided at its very first meeting on January 29, 1979, that indeed it was necessary to remember, and that a memorial could effectively promote such remembrance. The committee very quickly went further. It agreed that a physical monument alone was not enough. It recognized that a physical presence and the symbolism it can project can impact and influence. However, a living memorial, dynamic and human, must be the essence of the effort to remember. The committee decided that it must recommend creation of a memorial, which would be a learning resource center. It may contain a museum, library, classrooms, meeting space, audiovisual center. It could sponsor exhibits, conferences, commemorations, oral histories. Above all else, it will be for young and old, inside and outside of the classroom, in the Jewish and public schools. In September 1980, the director of the Holocaust Center, the first director of the Holocaust Center, Isaiah Cooperstein of blessed memory, began the work of the Holocaust Center from an office in the former Jewish Community Center in the building in Oakland. In the intervening 40 years, the center has seen a number of locations, moving from the Rudolph House on McKee Place to the JCC in Squirrel Hill, back to Oakland, and now to Greenfield, with plans in the works to return to the heart of the Jewish community in 2021. With each move, we've stayed true to our commitment to remembrance and to the vision that a Holocaust Center can influence and have impact. This evening, we will hear from past and present leaders of the Holocaust Center and the Jewish community, and from visionary artists and educators who are shaping the Holocaust Center, hopefully for the next 40 years. We look forward to a time we hope not too distant in the future, when we can celebrate this milestone in person. I'm pleased to introduce Jeff Finkelstein, President and CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm truly honored to be part of this program to mark an important milestone for what I consider one of our Jewish community's core and vital institutions. When I was asked to speak tonight about why the Holocaust Center is important to the Federation and to the community, a book came to my mind immediately. My father is the author of many young adult books, but his first was a children's book about the Holocaust. I'm holding it up. I'm not sure if you can see it, but the title is Remember Not to Forget. That is why our Holocaust Center must exist and be strong. We can never forget. We can never forget those who lost their lives. We can never forget those who survived. We can never forget the atrocities that took place. We can never forget the lessons of what can happen when a society loses its moral compass. We have seen here in Pittsburgh what can happen when a single hateful anti-Semitic person acts on misguided and destructive beliefs. The Holocaust Center and its work in educating the public can be a counterbalance to such hatred. The center teaches what can happen when such beliefs get out of control. By working on educating the educators, teaching the public, training law and order professionals, and frankly, exposing those completely unaware of the horrors of the Holocaust, which is unfortunately a growing number in America, we hope that history will not repeat itself for the Jewish people or any people. It does so through lectures and the arts, using multiple mediums to connect with all generations and to bring the lessons of the Holocaust to life. I'm so proud of the evolution of the Holocaust Center since its inception 40 years ago, and frankly, I'm blown away by what I've witnessed these last 22 years I've lived in Pittsburgh. The volunteer leadership who have helped guide the approach of the center with the professionals has been some of the best leadership I have seen. I look forward to its continued laser-like focus on its mission for many years to come, as it helps all of us on this Zoom and thousands of others to remember not to forget. It's now my pleasure to introduce and welcome our professional leader, Dr. Lauren Bairnsfather, Director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Barbara, and thank you to everyone joining us this evening. As you heard, I'm Lauren Apter Bairnsfather. I am the 5th Director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, and it really is an honor. Speaking of honors, I want to take the opportunity to thank the committee, the original committee of the Jewish Federation that made us a reality in 1979 and brought our first director on board 40 years ago this month, and that was Isaiah Cooperstein, and we will hear a little bit more about Isaiah tonight. I offer a special thank you to Lenny Rudolph of blessed memory, who bought us that house on McKee all those years ago, and to Dr. Sidney Busis, also of blessed memory, whose files from the 1980s I've had the pleasure of reviewing, and let me tell you, they provide a master class in how you build an organization's endowment. It is more impressive than I could put into words. We are recording tonight's program, and we look forward to sharing it later. We showed a very nice slide loop at the beginning of the program. When we release the video, we can intersperse those slides into the program, so everyone will have a chance to look at them more closely. They really are treasures. And it is now my pleasure to welcome the center's longest serving director, Linda Hurwitz.
Thank you, Lauren. It's my pleasure to join the program. Lauren was actually looking for an internship when I was director, and she got a position down at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in the Photo Archive Division. I was so fortunate in my reign as director to have so many survivors at a stage in their life when they could give their time and energy to the Holocaust Center. And I could accompany them to many, many speaking engagements. It started with Jack Gordon, whom you saw in some of the pictures, recording many of the Holocaust survivors' stories, including my mother's. And with him, with the survivors who had the time and energy to go with me, we went as far east as Altoona, as far south as Beckley, West Virginia, to Ohio, and all over wherever there was a middle school, elementary school, college, university, or church group or synagogue group that wanted to hear a Holocaust survivor. We traveled to try to bring that presentation to them. I was fortunate to then be part of the experience when Sheila Shamovitz and the late Dr. Anita Brostoff came to the Holocaust Center and decided to create a volunteer project with many volunteers, meeting with our survivors and helping to extract and help them shape anecdotal experiences from their many years of experience. Where Jack had recorded several hours of the Holocaust survivors' experiences, the book Flares of Memory captures turning points and moments from many, many survivors from many countries at different ages and different experiences. I have been teaching these stories since the book has been put together at Osher, and I love the fact that I can enhance each story with my personal experiences with every writer that contributed to Flares of Memory. I also had the wonderful experience of Dan Love and Ken Love using the actual footage from Moshe Baron's footage from his shtetl to create the video, The Life of Resistance and Survival of Moshe Malka Baron, which I also use when I teach at OSHA or when I go to schools and help students learn about Holocaust survivor stories. I recall meeting with survivors from Germany. We saw pictures of Marga and Fritz. And at first, some of the survivors from Germany were hesitant to call themselves Holocaust survivors because they were afraid that others would not appreciate what they went through from 33 to 39, since many of them got to the United States and were not in ghettos and camps. However, we see today how important what happened to them during those years as they were marginalized in Germany, as their rights were taken away from them, as their citizenship and their livelihood and their friendships were destroyed. When we look at that era of the rise of fascism, it's very important as a message forever to be responsible in our voting in our society to make sure that no government marginalizes any group of people. And that's one of the most important lessons for everyone from the Holocaust. To show the welcoming attitude of these survivors from Germany, we participated in a program called Action Reconciliation Service for Peace, where young Germans, in lieu of their service, decided to come to Pittsburgh and spend their time getting to know Holocaust survivors and going with them as young German voices to talk at schools. And so we had this juxtaposition of the survivor who had to flee Germany and a young German who came to Pittsburgh to spend time, sometimes 18 months to 2 years, to get to know our thriving Jewish community. And it was a wonderful counterpoint for our presentations. I remember very vividly some other experiences with our survivors. I took the survivors to Wilkinsburg during the time when a lot of teenagers were losing friends because of drive-by shooting. And I can remember us sitting in a classroom and the survivors sharing with young students how they as teenagers saw the death of their loved ones and their friends. And sitting there, they could say to these young people, you will get through it. You're stronger than you think. It doesn't mean that you don't take the experience with you, but you can survive it and you can honor those who perish by living a life in their honor. And so their inspiration and experience as resilient human beings over and over again affected students of every background and every makeup, any school that we went to. I loved working with the survivors in all of our commemorative programs that were mentioned, and we always tried to find a balance there. I remember our very first Kristallnacht program, we had a Dr. von Waldo, who had served in the Wehrmacht as a counterpoint to Cy Drescher and to survivors from Germany, talking about growing up as Jewish Germans and growing up as non-Jewish Germans and what it was like during that period. Likewise, I remember a Yom HaShoah at Soldiers and Sailors Hall for the 50th anniversary commemorating the end of the war, where we created a program with the rescuers and the survivors, counterpoint, to allow the survivors to thank the liberators who made it possible for them to be standing there on the stage at Soldiers and Sailors to share their experiences over and over again. I have been so lucky in my life to be raised by two strong Holocaust survivors and to know so many Holocaust survivors and find them always, every day, an inspiration in my life. No matter what happens, the Holocaust for me is a measure of what human beings can experience from the very best to the very worst. And so I find it the core of my existence. And with that, I'd like to turn the next part of the program to a Holocaust survivor, Dr. Stephen Fendes.
Thank you, Linda. It's good to be back in Pittsburgh. It's virtual, and it's nice to be introduced by you. I still have the Survivors Organization parting gift in front of me with your good wishes in there. For the first 8 years in living in Pittsburgh, I did not meet a single Holocaust survivor. Then one day I saw an ad in the Jewish Chronicle. It's right here. I'll pass it on to the center, calling for a meeting of the survivors at the JCC on January 29, 1981. I went there. I didn't recognize anybody, didn't know anybody. There were about 40 people there. The meeting was very slow to start. Eventually, I got up and I volunteered to serve as moderator for the day to get the meeting going, and that was accepted. The first issue of the day was quickly settled. How organized for a delegation to go out as a Pittsburgh delegation to the World Gathering of Survivors in Jerusalem in 1981. That went very fast. Then came the discussion that was proposed in the introduction about organizing a Holocaust Survivors Organization. In fact, it was named the Jewish Holocaust Survivors Organization because somewhere in the West, in a seminary, there were a group of Polish priests who had been in Auschwitz I and who were organizing something. So we wanted to distinguish ourselves. We quickly dropped that. Anyhow, there was a long discussion. And at the end of it, it was decided, yes, we'll form such an organization. And I was appointed, I was elected as president, and Shulamit Bastaki as vice president, and Libby Stern as secretary treasurer. Now, what I wanted to do is an organization with a charter, with bylaws, with filing as a branch of the American Gathering of Survivors in New York, collecting dues and contributing to the Federation rather than drawing from the Federation. The people there wanted none of that. They all had their religious and social organizations. They did not want another formal organization. So we wound up as an informal organization, no bylaws, no rules, but we had meetings, we had periodic changes of officers, we had meetings, lectures, Hanukkah and Purim parties, an annual picnic at the Emma Kaufman camp, and we went as a group to the second gathering in Washington in '83. Over the years, very shortly, partly through Linda's influence, the Survivors Organization was sort of subsumed into the Holocaust Center. And the best I could describe it is that it became the Speakers Bureau for Holocaust survivor speakers sent out by not by the organization, but by the center. And that worked out very well. The only place where we maintained our independence for many, many years was the Israel Day March in Squirrel Hill, where we marched separately from the center and separately from the Federation. Every year when it started, we were concerned that very few people were showing up, but these aging survivors were smarter than we were. They were waiting at the curb, and as we passed by, they joined the crowd. So by the time we got to the reviewing stand, we had a sizable crowd. The presidency of the Survivors Organization earned me a seat on the board of the center. For many, many years, I was the sole survivor on the Holocaust Center's board until one day the bylaws were changed, requiring that 3 members of the board be nominated from the Survivors Organization. I don't know if that rule still holds. If it holds, it must be very difficult to fill the quota these days. So I participated in all the events from the first opening. I happened to have gotten there earlier than anybody else except Eli Wiesel. So until the formality started, we chatted first in Hungarian, then in French. At the last opening that I witnessed, which was the one at the JC Annex, the display of 12 lithographs were those done by my mother, who perished in Auschwitz. So now, looking back for 40 years, I have many people to thank. I thank the members of the survivors themselves for having put faith in this total foreigner who dropped into their midst and who wound up backing me. I definitely want to thank the successive directors, particularly Linda Horwitz, for the accommodations they made for the survivors. And I want to similarly thank the board members and board presidents, particularly Sidney Busis, Jack Gordon, and Jeff Letwin, for the accommodations they made with the survivors. And I particularly want to single out Jack Gordon, who really established the working relationship between the two groups. And now I end here, and please welcome Hal Waldman. Thank you.
It's quite an honor to be able to speak about Isaiah Cooperstein. As was mentioned, Isaiah was the first director of the Holocaust Center. And I've known Isaiah for over 35 years. He was a wonderful, gentle person. And unfortunately, he died way too young this April of COVID. He was taken much too early. I met Isaiah and his wonderful wife, Elena, on a young leadership mission to Israel in the mid-'80s. It was a small group, it was very intimate, and everybody was 30, 35, so there was a lot of common interest. And Isaiah and I really hit it off. We had a shared interest in history, and we just got along famously. So when we returned to Pittsburgh, we continued meeting. We had lunches and things like that. And at a certain point, he introduced me to the Holocaust Center, which, as somebody mentioned at the time, was this kind of very small house next to the UJF building in Oakland. And really, all I can remember is they had a living room, a dining room, and there were a lot of books scattered everywhere. So after a certain amount of these meetings and my interest in history, I said to Isaiah, I'd really like to do something with the Holocaust Center, but I don't know what. So we had some more meetings, we kicked around some ideas, and I thought we had some good ones. And eventually I took him home to my wife, Diane, and with Isaiah's encouragement, we settled on the idea of creating an essay contest. And that's really how we started the writing contest, which has been around for 35 years now. And thanks to all the wonderful executive directors we've had, that little idea of an essay contest has grown into a much larger project dealing with categories for art, for film, and poetry. And when we started it way back in the mid-'80s, we deliberately wanted to have the program go to Jews, but especially non-Jews. And we did a lot of essay contests at Saint this and Saint that. And it was very rewarding because a lot of our winners were from Catholic schools and Protestant schools. And, you know, it was very gratifying to see it spread out that way. And really the capper is eventually, we expanded the contest to Israel. So now that Israelis come over during a week, celebrate their win, and get to know Pittsburgh. And I think if you look back over all these 35 years, we probably had over 10,000 students participating over the years. So it really had quite an impact, and very proud of it. The other great thing about Isaiah is he really introduced me to the survivors group, who, you know, in my mind are the most amazing people on earth. When we first started the essay contest, and really up until rather recently, we had the survivors handing out awards. So it was super meaningful for the kids. And it was just a great benefit for me to be able to meet a lot of the survivors. So as I think back about Isaiah, I think back about 35 years ago when we dreamed up this contest. And I just think it's a wonderful, enduring legacy of a wonderful person, Isaiah Cooperstein, the first head of the Holocaust Center. And now I'd like to introduce Mr. Jeffrey Letwin.
Thank you, Hal. Let me say, first of all, that this is a tremendous honor for me to be included in the Holocaust Center's 40th anniversary program. The Holocaust Center has been such a meaningful organization to me as far back as I can remember. And so, Lauren, I want to thank you and Barbara for including me. And thank you, Steve Fenvis, for the shout out. That was great. I appreciate that very much. I've studied the Holocaust as far back as I can remember, even as a child, as a high school student, including also as a history major at Pitt. When I returned to Pittsburgh in 1980 and I heard that the Federation was establishing a Holocaust Center, I knew immediately that I wanted to be involved. The offices back then were at the old YM and WHA. I was in Oakland, and I met with Isaiah Cooperstein back then. We became fast friends. He was friendly, down to earth, and responsive. He had me involved in committees and then at the board very early on when I was just a young pup in this community. Isaiah was a visionary. He knew what the center could be, and he worked tirelessly to establish it as a leading Holocaust center in the United States. We were definitely sad to see him leave Pittsburgh for the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, but it was a tremendous opportunity for him. Eventually, in 1991, I became the chair of the commission, working with my dear friend Linda Hurwitz, another fantastic executive director. During my tenure, I had the opportunity to meet with some amazing heroes and heroines like Elie Wiesel and Beate Klarsfeld, just to name a few. I also had the honor, Linda and I were invited to the U.S. Holocaust Museum's dedication services. It was very, very moving, and I still remember Elie Wiesel speaking over chants from anti-Semites across the grounds that the Holocaust was a lie and never happened. Can you imagine sitting at the dedication of the Holocaust Museum and having to hear that shouted over someone as spectacular as Elie Wiesel trying to speak to the audience? I think Linda and I were both shocked. Linda and I worked together on relocating the center from the Rudolph House in Oakland to the Rudolph Center at the JCC. We knew then how important it was for the center to be in Squirrel Hill. And now as the circle of life goes, I'm coming full circle with the center. As co-chair of the Tree of Life's steering committee, I now have the opportunity to work with the Holocaust Center to create a new presence at the site of the Tree of Life in Squirrel Hill. This will be a tremendous opportunity for both the center and the Tree of Life to make a meaningful site of remembrance in Squirrel Hill. It is most fitting that the Holocaust Center have its presence at the site of the worst anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history. With that, I would like to introduce David Suffren, the new chair of the Federation's Board of Directors. David.
Thank you, Jeff. I grew up as the son of a survivor, but in a home and family where the Holocaust and its impact were just not discussed, and only a peripheral connection to the Pittsburgh and global Jewish community was our norm. After many years of acceptance of that reality, I felt a need to develop a greater connection to the past history of my family and learn about what happened, and more importantly, to learn how to have influence so history would be less likely to repeat itself. I joined the Holocaust Center board, experienced its programs, and participated in helping guide the center expand its exposure and impact on the students, teachers, and families of Western Pennsylvania and beyond. By doing this, my involvement provided fulfillment and pride in what the power of Holocaust education can offer to those who have been unaware of our past history, and how those can be motivated to offer their support so more of us can say never again. I'm grateful for everyone who has helped the Holocaust Center grow and increase its reach and offerings. These people are the center volunteers, staff, donors, advocates, volunteers, and probably most importantly, the survivors who were and are willing to share through direct contact and recorded testimony a horrific time in their lives with current and future generations. I am enthusiastic that the Holocaust Center is poised to move in more ways than one to provide more education to more groups, particularly those of other minority and marginalized communities, and join with them to ensure that the seedlings of hate, bigotry, and intolerance are crushed wherever they grow, and I'm grateful and proud to be a part of it. I'd now like to introduce Rebecca Jacobson.
Thank you, Dave. I'm very honored to be here representing the Generations Legacy Group, a group run by and for families of survivors. First, I want to congratulate and thank Lauren and all of the previous leaders, along with the staff of the Center, the Federation, volunteers, donors, board members. The Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh is a gem in this community, and we are incredibly grateful for the work that you do and have done for 40 years. The educational mission of the Holocaust Center is immeasurably enriched by the participation of Holocaust survivors. Our parents and grandparents speak with a moral leadership that cannot be equaled. But as we look to the future, we know they have a finite time with us. It's critically important that their stories be preserved and continue to be told. As the descendants of survivors, we have a responsibility to extend their message into the future. The Generations Group partners with the Holocaust Center to meet this important part of their mission. As many of the center's activities moved online this past year, so did the work of the Generations Group. And if you haven't seen them already, I'd like to point you to the incredible talks given this summer as part of the Generations Speaker Series by Linda Hurwitz, Lee Fishbach and Oscar Singer, Hannah Brody, and Debbie Stuber, as well as many other talks given in person that were recorded in previous years. They are all available on the center's website and on Facebook, where they have already been viewed thousands of times. For all the 2Gs and 3Gs out there, we hope that you will consider getting more involved with the Generations Group. Please contact the center to be added to our mailing list, and we look forward to seeing you at one or more of the events being planned for the coming year. Congratulations to the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh on reaching this very important milestone. Kol HaKavod, and now back to Lauren.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca, and everyone who has spoken so far. It's wonderful to be in your company. I wish that we were together in the same room, but we'll take what we can get. As you've heard, Holocaust survivors and their families have built and sustained the Holocaust Center from our earliest years. The slideshow that we showed earlier captured images of our earliest leaders, some of whom have spoken this evening, many of whom are no longer with us. There is a sadness to looking back as much as there is optimism and hope. And I really want to acknowledge these earliest leaders and the people who built our endowment. And I have a list of our endowments that I'm going to make sure gets published with the video version. It's a long list. We are so grateful to all of you for really setting us up to be sustainable, and also to the foundations that have supported us and several that have supported us with emergency funds because of COVID. Incredible. Also to all of our donors. Without all of you, we would not be here in 2020. So it is my pleasure now to invite Laurie Moser.
Thank you. Lauren, good evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Nick Haberman this evening, truly a product of his hometown, Shaler, Pennsylvania. He's a graduate of Shaler High School, a teacher at Shaler High School, and a fourth-generation Shaler area resident. But he also represents the future of the Holocaust Center. Teaching Holocaust was always his passion, and in 2018, Nick received the Holocaust Educator of the Year Award from our center. This motivated him even further. He created LIGHT, the Leadership Through Innovation in Genocide and Human Rights Teaching Initiative, to take his educational efforts to a whole new level. His hope is to make never again a reality by transforming remembrance into action. Through the generation of the Steel Tree Fund of the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh and support from the Holocaust Center, Classrooms Without Borders, and Together We Remember, the LIGHT initiative is now an ongoing program in 11 schools in Western Pennsylvania. Who knows how far light will travel and at what speed? Let Nick tell you his plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lori. Good evening, everybody. It's an absolute honor and privilege to be able to speak with all of you tonight. As Lori said, I am a fourth generation teacher at Shaler Area High School, and I'm the founder of the Light Education Initiative. I've been teaching about the Holocaust since 2006, first in my 9th grade American history curriculum, then and now as a standalone semester-long Holocaust elective at Shaler for juniors and seniors. Growing up in Shaler, I knew nothing of the Holocaust until I reached high school. And even then, it was merely a few days of study in my American history class. Even in college, I learned very little about the event. Like many teachers in the region, I credit the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh for giving me the content and the confidence to become the Holocaust educator I am today. My introduction to the center came 14 years ago when I was driving Holocaust survivor Jack Sitzheimer home from sharing his family's story with my students. Jack said two things to me on that car ride, both of which changed my life. First, he said, "You know, I'm gonna die soon, and when I do, it's up to you to tell my story." Then he asked me, "Have you ever been to the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh?" "No." "Before you take me home, we're going there, and I'm gonna show you around." Like many teachers and students, meeting my first Holocaust survivor immediately changed my perspective on life. And 14 years later, my former students still ask about Jack, and they still remember that moment. My entire foundation for teaching the Holocaust was built not only upon that moment, but the countless experiences my students and I have had with the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. As I became a better and better Holocaust educator, I began to realize and fear that when I eventually stopped teaching at Shaler, the center would have to start at square one with somebody new, and my Holocaust elective could potentially disappear. Everything I had accomplished at Shaler through the hard work of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh could be gone in an instant. I was determined to create an innovative, sustainable, incentive-based approach to Holocaust, genocide, and human rights education, with students leading the charge, not the teachers. Something where the students' time and energy in school resulted in real change within the community right now, not later. Something to inspire, to prepare, and to empower them to counter hate speech, anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia, sexism, homophobia. An education initiative to speak for all victims of identity-based violence, inspired by the lessons we learned before, during, and after the Holocaust. Thus, the Light Education Initiative was born. LIGHT, as Lori said, is an acronym that stands for Leadership Through Innovation in Genocide and Human Rights Teaching. The mission of LIGHT is to inspire, prepare, and empower our students for leadership roles in Holocaust, genocide, and human rights education, remembrance, and advocacy. LIGHT takes a three-tiered approach. Each school creates a LIGHT center, designates a LIGHT coordinator, and engages in LIGHT programming. The LIGHT coordinator is the teacher within a school who oversees and supports LIGHT. The coordinator also builds and maintains a permanent bridge to the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. In Shaler, resources and programs the Holocaust Center has worked to create over the last 40 years are now embedded within the school's LIGHT Center forever, and the coordinator position will remain even after I move on. LIGHT programming empowers our students to become local leaders, using the lessons learned through their study of the Holocaust, then planning and organizing Holocaust, genocide, and human rights community events under the guidance of the LIGHT coordinator and in collaboration with the Holocaust Center. Sometimes these events are hosted at school, sometimes online, sometimes at community libraries, but they're always inspired by the lessons of the Holocaust, with a mission to fight anti-Semitism and counter hate speech for all victims of identity-based violence, past and present. The LIGHT Center is the hub within the school building where this all happens. LIGHT centers are many things. First, they act as shared humanities makerspace classrooms dedicated to research, remembrance, and advocacy. Second, they're safe spaces and brave spaces for students to share sincere thoughts and emotions and display their Holocaust, genocide, and human rights art and writing like those created during the Waldman competition. Next, the centers function as the hub of the school, connecting students to leadership opportunities throughout the school district and region. Lastly, they serve as a permanent space of remembrance, a local Holocaust memorial in every school, but not just the Holocaust, dedicated to all victims of genocides and other human rights violations. Nearly all school districts are prepared right now for growth and sustained support of Light after an initial grant to prove the value of the initiative to the school district. The Light model provides schools with 3 years of grant funding and participation in the Light network, along with professional development and continuous support by the regional Light director, me, and the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. At the end of 3 years, Light helps students and teachers transition the initiative from a grant-funded program to a sustained school district budget line item, permanently embedding it within the district. Light truly has the potential to counter anti-Semitism, white supremacy, and hate speech within schools and communities, but the approach is methodical and delicate, and with a teacher given the time and support necessary to nurture their students into these leadership roles. As one of my students said recently, without Light, I would still be blind to the violence of the world and would lack many of the leadership qualities that I cherish about myself. Another student said, being a part of Light gave me a sense of purpose and pride, and I could watch as my hard work paid off in ways far greater than grades. Additionally, my Light Shaler alumni are leading a new charge to formally and systematically counter racism that exists throughout the Shaler area school district by working with our alumni of color, our superintendent, our teachers, our current students, and our school board. Light plants a seed that will forever grow our youth into the community leaders we need them to be. As Light continues to grow and expand, so does its reach into the hotbeds of white supremacy. Though Light was born in Shaler, the mission and vision have always been much larger. This school year, Light will support 14 school districts at varying socioeconomic levels across 5 counties in Western Pennsylvania: Allegheny, Beaver, Butler, Washington, and Westmoreland. The schools in each of these counties will become Light hubs, inspiring their neighboring school districts and empowering our youth to take action right now against white supremacy, all in collaboration with the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh's existing programs and resources. Light will bring countless more students and teachers into constant communication with the center while permanently embedding the center's 40 years of programs and resources in countless more schools. The success of Light is entirely thanks to the generous financial support of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh and also support from the Steel Tree Fund of the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh, the Grable Foundation, and the Heinz Endowments. The goal of Light is to continue the Pittsburgh tradition of building bridges to better connect our students, teachers, and communities. But more importantly, as our next speaker so eloquently said, it's not just enough to build bridges, we need to cross them too. These bridges will bring innovation and sustainability to Holocaust education, permanently embedding decades of successful Holocaust Center programming and resources into our school system. Lauren, thank you so much for the opportunity to share Light with everyone tonight. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the next speaker tonight, community leader and Emmy award-winning artist and powerhouse, Imei Alaquiva.
What's up, everybody? How you doing? I know you're on mute, but it's absolutely phenomenal to be a part of this incredible program. 40 years? Are you kidding me right now? Like, that's a big deal. Salute to everyone who helped to make this happen. Where do I start? My passion for the Holocaust and sort of everything that is of it stems from a conversation that I had with Dr. Sippy Gur. My wife would go on these tours for Classrooms Without Borders. So she went one year and she knew that I was a filmmaker. So she said, you might want to meet my husband because, he does film and things too. So you might want to meet him. So, I get this call from the infamous doctor, and she's just like, "Hello, Ime, how are you? I heard about you. I need to meet you. I want to meet you soon. I want to meet now. And I'm just like, hello, how you doing? How's everything going? I want to meet you in Squirrel Hill. I have an idea. And then when I met her, just her energy just takes over a room. And she's like, I want to take you to Poland to tell the story about the Jewish story. So here I am, African-American man, thinking like, why do you want me to tell this story about, the Jewish culture? And, I created excuses to not go, all the way up leading to 10 days. I tried to give her an excuse. It just wasn't happening. She said, I don't want to take any excuse. You're going with me, period. So I went over there, and it turned out to be one of the most transformative experiences, period. Here I am, an African-American man going, to Poland, Warsaw, Treblinka, these concentration camps and things of that nature. And I sort of turned my lens into, what if I was going to Africa to tell my story about, my ancestors who were enslaved? So I turned my filmmaker lens on, and I came back with some photography and some imagery that was just absolutely just mind-blowing. And then when I was able to say, all right, so I have these images, what could I do with them? Connected with Lauren from the Holocaust Center, where she said, hey, listen, how about we put together an exhibit called Roots, where we take, photos of survivors and individuals, and we put together an exhibit. And Optic Voices is an exhibit that I have that is an interactive photography exhibit for social justice. So when we put that together, it was a huge success. It was extended maybe twice, I believe. And people were just, blown away by what we were able to put together. But it's all about how we use art and activism. And learning from arts and activism, I figured during this Black Lives Matter, situation that's going on with the demise of George Floyd and everyone hitting the streets, I began to take the photography of these Black Lives Matter moments. But when I came home, my daughter began to notice that there were no one doing ASL or sign language in any of these photos or imagery. So I said, you're absolutely right. And there's no one deaf in my family, but my daughter, 8 years old, inspired me to put together a PSA for people who are deaf, hard of hearing, and those with disabilities. And a lot of you might not know that September is the National Deaf Awareness Month. And also we're celebrating 30 years of the Disability Act being passed in this country. And as it relates to African Americans, learning how African Americans with the Tuskegee Airmen experiment were used for tests, and then learning about the T4 program or the euthanasia program that the Germans put on 2 years prior to the Holocaust, where they did experiments on how powerful poisons were. They did it on people who were disabled. In Germany, they consider people with a mental or physical disability as individuals who were, not good for the financial gain of the country. So there's a lot of intersectionality with this piece that I created called Unspeakable. It's 60 seconds, and I wrote the script in 2 o'clock in the morning. I called some individuals the very next day. We filmed at 4 Black Lives Matter protests. I want to play this, and this has gone viral with over 2 million impressions. And my daughter, 8 years old, was just featured on Good Morning America last Friday, where she spoke about inspiring something like this. So hopefully we can go to that clip. So when you think of arts, we have to understand the power of the arts. Paul Robeson once said that artists are gatekeepers of the truth. If it wasn't for artists to crystallize and fossilize our stories, where would we be? And I am so, so grateful for Lauren for allowing me to be a part of this project and for us to continue to build on an outstanding relationship. Thank you all.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
There you go.
All right. Thank you, Imei. We invited Nick and Imei tonight because our work together is the future of the Holocaust Center. The LIGHT initiative, as Nick said, will embed Holocaust education in schools and communities in counties across our region. And these are counties where we are seeing an increased risk of students being recruited into white supremacist groups. So, I mean, we are getting in on the ground and we are working with the students, teaching them things that will change their lives. As far as Imei's work, he has inspired us. We saw the Optic Voices exhibit a couple of years before we brought it to the Holocaust Center. I was a little bit nervous. It has protest photographs. After the shooting at the Tree of Life building, I said, now we have to do it because we understand the connections between anti-Semitism and racism. We understand that we fight a common enemy in white nationalism. So Imei and our work together is inspiring us to do the work, and it's going to be hard work, to be a truly anti-racist organization. And inspired by the unspeakable PSA that we just watched, and for people who are listening, it's video of many people of different backgrounds speaking American Sign Language. So very expressive gestures and absolutely beautiful. We're inspired by that. It reminds us we should have ASL interpreters at our programs. We should have captioning of our programs. When we are a truly inclusive organization, which is our goal and is something we're actively working on this year, these are things we will do, and not because someone requests it, but because it's the right thing to do. So in addition to those things, true to our roots, which we heard so much about tonight from such wonderful speakers, we will always stand up against anti-Semitism. Jeff Finkelstein spoke so beautifully of our laser focus on our mission. That is at the core of what we do. And if you study white nationalism, you learn that anti-Semitism is the worldview, and racism fits under that umbrella. We are all in this together. Minorities are in this struggle together. We do all of this work with support from our incredible advisory board and lay leadership. I want to thank the board chairs I have worked with, Lori Gutman, Jake Jacobson, Barbara Shapira, all of the chairs that came before that, some of whom are represented on this call. I want to thank Ed Friedman and family for the long-term loan of artifacts, which we look forward to displaying at Wilkins and Shady when the time comes. And thank you, Jeff Letwin, for mentioning that plan. We're very excited about that. As we live in COVID time, as I've been thinking of it, the Holocaust Center is as active as ever. We're active from afar. We will offer virtual programs throughout the coming year in honor of our 40th anniversary. We will make this program available through the recording, and I will finally be able to list out the wonderful endowments that support us, foundations, our new life and legacy donors over the last couple of years. We can't wait to celebrate 40 years in person, but we'll be patient because it's required right now. If our work resonates with you and you want to join us for our next successful 40 years, please go to our website and make a donation or contact us to make a legacy gift. The Jewish community, which it was mentioned that we did these recorded talks with generations. Debbie Stuber and her parents are part of one, and her father called us a big Jewish family in Pittsburgh. If you want to be part of this big Jewish family, you already are. If you want to join us, if you think that remembrance and Holocaust education and fighting anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial are really important, please join us in this crucial mission. We have a lot of work left to be done. We've been here for 40 years, and to that I say, Ad Me'av Esrim, to 120. We're nearing the end of our program now, but for now, I want to give the final word to Dr. Barbara Burston.
Thank you, Lauren. Lauren, I want to thank you not just for this evening, but for everything you've been doing. You have been an absolute treasure that we have had in this community. We're so glad that you returned back to Pittsburgh. In addition, I'm sure your family is too. But your energy, your passion, your intelligence, all your abilities have just brought the Holocaust Center to a whole new level. And I'm speaking, I'm sure, representing an awful lot of people who feel that way. When you asked me to speak about the importance of Holocaust education tonight, I must tell you that I was immediately reminded of a line that I read once, a line that said that the Holocaust is a cautionary tale of evil. I think that statement is so true because one question keeps screaming out for an answer. How could 6 million innocent people just be wiped off the face of the earth? How could it happen that ordinary men and women committed extraordinary acts of brutality and inhumanity? How could it happen that people with an education, with a religious faith, could be transformed into monsters, acting with complete abandon and little sense of individual responsibility? I doubt we can really answer those questions satisfactorily, but what we can do is to have students consider not just what went so horribly wrong, but to reflect on whether such savagery could ever happen again in our civilized world. What are the temptations, the trigger points, the circumstances that impacted then, and what are they today? What are the warning signs? I believe that a study of a Holocaust is a springboard. Indeed, it pushes us, compels us to think about one's own values, one's own responsibilities, one's own actions. Even a short descent into the hell of the Holocaust can prompt profound questions of who we are, what we believe, what we want to do. And for most teachers who I hope are listening this evening, this deep dive into this tragic history takes place when their students are already exploring their identity and thinking about who they are and what they want to be. A study of the Holocaust comes with a warning label. I tell my students that, not only because it plunges one into a maelstrom of evil, but because it also forces us to think more carefully about who we are and what we want the world around us to look like. While we can never inoculate against prejudice and hatred, there never will be a vaccine against that. We can try to educate so that we can impact our students in a positive way, so that they hopefully will make real commitments to tolerance, to fairness, mutual understanding, and social justice, and that they will be more apt to call out the bully and the demagogue. We can never bring back the 6 million lives that were lost, the 1.5 million children who never got to live out their dreams. But we can pay homage to those victims by doing our part to bring about a more just and equitable society. It is a noble mission, a necessary mission. For 40 years, the Holocaust Center has sought to encourage and help teachers to fulfill that mission. And it is poised today to continue to do that even more in the years ahead. All educators should know that by teaching about the Holocaust, you are not only teaching about the past, but you are also helping to forge a better future, a future we all want for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren. Bravo to the teachers. Keep up all your good work. Thank you.
That will conclude our formal program. Thank you to everyone who spoke tonight and honored our 40 years and the beginning of a year of celebrating that milestone. And panelists, please stick around for one more minute. Thank you all.